What's good, folks, family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth to another episode of Disguise Coverage, the only podcast that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin and is presented by the best pizza in Buffalo, New York, and that is One Pie Pizza. You can find the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you're listening to this show on. I'm your host, Anthony Prohaska. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro, 2 underscores, ANT. In tonight's episode of Disguise Coverage, we will be diving into some specific questions about the Buffalo Bills 2024 defense and also handing out / placing some superlatives on certain position groups, certain players, certain pieces, certain aspects, diving into a lot of aspects on that side of the ball where I think there's a fair amount of questions, and I think most people think there are a fair amount of questions given just the dialogue that seems to be surrounding the defense with all the on the field and off the field changes that we are seeing. So there should be some differences in this upcoming season that are significant versus years past from an overall schematic standpoint, coaching standpoint, player standpoint, maybe rotations, usage rates, coverages, whole bunch of things. We're going to dive into some of those aspects tonight in this episode. And when I say we, that is because I am not alone. I am joined by one of my favorite guests, and that is Mr. Bruce Nolan. Bruce, I appreciate you taking the time to join me. You're fantastic. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me once again. I feel like I've been like an honorary co-host the last couple of months. I've been on a couple times in the last couple of months. I will say, you put me after Mina Kimes, Anthony. Like,
I think the last time you were on, I think the last time I had you on after Dane Brugler.
Yes, you did.
I think
It was Dane and then Bruce and then Mina and then Bruce. So, this is not a very nice way to treat your honorary co-host. I got to be honest.
I'm sorry. I apologize. What's funny is I knew. So one, I like to take advantage of, you are currently a free agent, and as you make your decision on your podcasting future, while you have the time, I'm purely just soaking up every free minute that you have, because I know, and for those who don't know, behind the scenes, Tuesday nights, there's usually Bruce has to make the time to be able to join me on the show because of his previous recording schedule and just general things in life. So now that I know you have a brief opening for a small semblance of time, I'm trying to take advantage of that in every way that I can by getting you on the show as much as I can. But it's purely ironic and coincidental that I've had you on after 2 big guests. But when I asked you and you said yes, like the day after, I was like, oh crap, I guarantee he says something because he's after Mina, just like he was after Bruce. So that was not on purpose. I apologize.
I'm not offended. I don't have to listen. Anyone who's listened to my content for any meaningful time, they know what they're getting at this point. I don't think anybody is surprised by anything they get from Bruce at this point. I don't think I'm throwing anybody any curveballs. So whether I come after Mina, whether I come after Dane, whether I come before somebody who's never podcasted before in their entire life, I think either way, the expectations are going to be pretty well set.
That's fair. You're a known quantity at this point. I think you have a high floor, also a pretty high ceiling. I think the trajectory is still there.
I'm gritty, try hard. First guy in the locker room, first guy in the building, last guy out.
That's what
quicker than fast is what I think. Quicker than fast.
Great attitude.
Real
You're a leader.
Coach's son. Coach on the field.
The guy you want to like marry your daughter type of guy. Like that's
super heady player.
Well done.
Okay.
I like it. Well done. Bruce, as we start to dive into some of the specifics of this episode with the specific questions and the superlatives we will be handing out, overall high level Bills defense in 2024. I alluded to it briefly in the intro. You and I talked about it in the multiple episodes we did leading up to the NFL draft and then coming out of the draft. And we talked about, how this team takes shape after the Bills had their draft class come in and kind of made everything finalized. Where are you at on this defense from a high level standpoint? Or is there any one thing that's on your mind or one player? Do you have an overarching thought or anything that you're wondering? Like when you think about this Bills 2024 defense, as we start to head into this, where's your head at?
Just the right level of newness. That's what I think. That's where I'm at. I'm excited for the Buffalo Bills defense. I'm excited for a different play caller, although Sean McDermott did a good job last year. I'm excited about some newer, younger players. I am excited about something a little bit different. I don't think you ever want an overhaul but you want a dash of something new.
A dash of a revamp. A dash
of a revamp. You don't want to rebuild, you want to reload, right? You want to tweak. You want defense 2.0. You want the remastered version of the defense, the definitive edition, right? It's you continue back. This is Skyrim getting milked for everything it possibly can by Todd Howard 11 years after it released, right? That's the reason why it happened. In 2022, they're all like, no. This is the definitive version of Skyrim, right? You're just iterating on the same things over and over and over again. So for me, it's just the right level of newness. It's enough newness for me to be excited, but not so much newness that I think that the floor is going to drop out. And so for me, that's a nice balance. Because if it's the same thing over and over again, you go back to the whole Einstein thing, right? Definition of insanity, repeating the same action over and over again, expecting different results, right? Same input, same output, right? Trash data in, trash data out, right? So I'm not saying the Buffalo Bills defense was trash, but I think that we've gone on record as saying they've underperformed in the playoffs relative to the way they performed in the regular season. And if you just roll back the exact same thing, I think that there wouldn't be a lot of reason for optimism, because at that point you'd be going the entire season going, well, yeah, they're playing well, but let's wait for the defense to show up in the playoffs. That's what you would be saying. But this year, if they perform well in the regular season, then it's, yes, they're performing well in the regular season, but they're doing it with different players. They're doing it with a different play caller. It gives you excitement that they could do it in the playoffs. So that's exactly what I mean, where I say just enough newness.
Within that, just, enough, or just that right amount of newness, if you do have any trepidation, where does that trepidation lie? And if answering that spoils one of your answers later, feel free to say it's a spoiler, so I'm not going to answer.
It's a spoiler for question number 5.
Okay, that's what I figured. And
that's Mambo number 5. So we can't spoil that.
Not Maroon 5?
Not Maroon 5. I'm more of a Lou Bega guy.
Okay.
Than what's the lead singer of Maroon 5? Adam Levine. Yes. He's at a payphone trying to call home. Yes, exactly. I understand. But he's at a payphone trying to spoil number 5, and Lou Bega's like not going to have it, right? So
dumb. Well done. All right, we're gonna jump right into it. For the first question segment that we will be tackling here in this episode is, who will be the most important player for the Buffalo Bills defense in 2024? And Bruce, one of the reasons I really like to have you on the show is when you answer things, you define them in a specific way that I think is usually very helpful towards a lot of people, because I think it puts questions and labels into perspective for people. And with a superlative like this and a label like this, most important player for the Bills defense in 2024, before you give your answer on who that player is, how did you define important or most important? What were your criteria? What were your anchor points or pieces you were hanging your hat on for this answer?
So in typical Bruce fashion, my definition for important was exactly the same as it was when you and I did the project with Joe Marino for Locked On Bills, where we defined the top 10 most important players for the Buffalo Bills. The difference is the word future was not in this prompt, but it was in Joe Marino's prompt. But the definition of important remains the same. So the way that I define important is this. I take the gap between the best case scenario and the worst case scenario for that individual player. Then I say, okay, how much is that swing, one way or another, going to affect the team? So if they were to swing from their worst case to their best case, how does that affect the team? In this case, the defense. And if they were to swing from the best case to the worst case, how does that affect the team? In this case, the defense. So my number 4 and number 5 players on Joe Marino's top 10 most important players, the future of the Buffalo Bills, were Gregory Rousseau and Ed Oliver, in that order, 4 and 5, neck and neck. And here's the reason why. Ed Oliver, to Ryan's point in the comments, is already awesome. That's not the question. The question is not the best player. It's the most important, and I'm going to tell you why I picked Groot over Ed Oliver. It's due to the swing. Gregory Rousseau was off to a really good start in 2023, and he fought through an injury, And I just think he kind of leveled out a little bit. I don't think we got a chance to really see the ascension the way that we thought we were going to.
Correct.
Now, he doesn't have a 10-sack guy on the opposite side from him in Floyd. And I think that the pass rushing specifically off the end is a question for this Buffalo Bills team. A lot of us thought that they could potentially invest a day 2 pick in a pass rusher, and they didn't. Javon Sullivan, round 5. That's what you get. So for me, it's if Gregory Rousseau hits the ceiling, which I am projecting at where he was trending toward in 2023 before the injury, which is probably an 8-9 sack guy. I think that makes a really big difference for the Buffalo Bills because he's already an elite run defender.
Yes.
Right now.
Absolutely.
Like, he was an elite run defender as a rookie.
He was one of the best, I think, in terms of stops and stop percentage, like right out of the bat as a rookie. An aspect that I said on the show. Yes. I walked in and I wasn't expecting that, like that level of top tier run defense play right out of the gate.
And you hope you're going to get that with the length, right? That's what you hope you're going to get from Group. But you also hope that you're going to get disengagement pass rushing moves. And a lot of people, when he was coming out, they were like, okay, what do you do with him? Do you make him like a 5-tech and turn him into like an Eric Armstead sort of a player? And that's what I kind of thought maybe a team might do with him when they drafted him. But then the Bills drafted him as a 4-3 defensive end and played him on the edge. And he has not reduced down inside the way that I thought he was going to the level that I thought he was going to. And so now you have even less of a depth on the edge, which means you're probably not going to get that, which means the development's going to have to come in traditional pass rush moves on the outside, and you're not going to have Leonard Floyd on the other side. So in his best case scenario, this whole defensive line gets a lift on a pass rush standpoint. In his worst case scenario, the Bills don't get a lot of rush on the outside.
Yes.
And then you have to hope that AJ Epenesa's efficiency holds up in much greater volume. And you just can't count on that. Yeah, I would love if AJ Epenesa's efficiency picked up. I mean, if you have 6.5 sacks on the amount of snaps that he gets, and then he gets a full-time load, all of a sudden he's a 10-sack guy. But that's not how that works. Yeah. You don't just take the fractions and multiply them out. So for me, that's the reason why I went with Groot instead of Ed Oliver. And I'll tell you why I had to draw the line. If worst case scenario for Ed Oliver, we still have Daquan Jones, who was playing out of his marbles at the beginning of 2023. And I don't have the same concern about Daquan Jones and the age that other people do, not only because it's a position that has historically aged really well into your mid-30s, but also we don't have to do that whole, will he come back from the pec injury? We saw him after the pec. He came back and he was playing well. Yeah. So I don't need to pull that whole, well, I sure hope he recovers, the way he was looking before. No, he was playing well when he came back. And so I think Daquan Jones was playing at a higher level than AJ Epinesa was. Yes. So it's kind of like I'm making this determination based on my confidence level in their running mate, and my confidence level in their running mate matters a lot more in worst case scenarios. So that's how I defined important. That's the reason why I went with Gregory Rousseau. That is how I drew the line between him and Ed Oliver.
Did you struggle with this answer at all in terms of like figuring out who made the cut, or once you defined it, like landing on Groot, like was there any type of consternation for you in it?
I went back and forth because Ed Oliver has hit a level that Gregory Rousseau, in my opinion, hasn't hit yet. So for me, that was the struggle. But I have to play the best case scenario definitions versus the worst case scenario definitions. So let's put numbers on it for a second, okay? Let's say, for example, that everybody's worst case scenario is a 0. Okay. Everybody's worst case scenario is a 0 because you suffer a career-ending injury the first day of training camp. That's your worst case scenario. Okay. The best case scenario for Ed Oliver, we've already seen a really, really good player. It's like an 8 out of 10, right? The best case scenario for like a Groot, right, might be a 7 out of 10, right? Well, that's fine. Now the question is, you think, okay, that Ed Oliver's got a bigger swing, right? That's where my head initially went to. There's 8 points there, and there's 7 points difference for Gregory Rousseau. Then you say, okay, how many of those points get made up by your running mate? What's that difference? Go. Okay. Right. And I felt more comfortable in saying Daquan Jones can pick up the load. I also feel much more comfortable with the defensive tackle depth this year than I did last year. Jordan Phillips and Tim Settle, I think, both got upgraded from this offseason. And I feel less confident in the defensive end depth, especially since you didn't draft one on day 2. You signed Casey Toohill, you drafted Javon Solomon, you signed AJ Epinesa, and you said, okay, let's go. So for me, that's the reason why I had to draw that line, and that's how I did it.
I like it. I like your definition of it. I like how you came to your answer. I asked about if there was any consternation for you because I legitimately struggled with this question after posing it to you and really settling on my answers. And I define it similarly to how you do in terms of like most important player. Like what is like the best case scenario for like that player and also that particular position, and what's the worst case scenario for that player and for that particular position. So like ceilings and floors and realistic expectations combined with what that position and or position group looks like as well. In previous years, I probably would have said Taron Johnson just because of how good I think he is, how tremendously difficult the slot and the apex is in football today, just with what you have to do. I really, and I say this every offseason, I wish slot corners and apex players in general got more shine and more importance on them in terms of discussion because of how much of a premium position, again, for me personally, I think that position is. But I think some more people are starting to come around to that notion and that idea. And in previous years, I really did not like what was behind Taron Johnson, and I found it very worrisome. I still don't love what's behind Taron Johnson right now, but and this is maybe me probably forecasting or wish casting a little bit. Though Cole Bishop is a safety, I still think he's best suited anywhere near and in and around the line of scrimmage, like we talked about. I think he's best suited as like a monster man, apex, big nickel slot hybrid type of dude. If something were to happen to Taron Johnson, I feel a little more comfortable knowing they do have kind of a break glass in case of emergency option, potentially putting Cole Bishop there. Now, I don't know if that's in the cards for them or if they even see him as that, or they purely see him as a deep safety and as a buzz safety robber type of guy, and slot apex big nickel is out of the question for them. But in my mind, I see him as being kind of like a safety net piece. And I like that much better than I do Cam Lewis or Saron Neal or anybody who's been an option for Taron Johnson in the past. So Taron was going to be my answer. And then I backed off him a little bit. And then I went to the defensive line, defensive line is the engine for this team. And I started playing all the games in my head, similar to kind of what you did to break it all down. I ended up moving off a defensive line. I went back to the second level. So after Taron, I was surprisingly thinking of Bernard and Milano, but I ended up settling on Matt Milano. And it really because of that. And it's funny because I feel better about the linebacker group this year. I don't love the depth behind Milano and Bernard, but having Morrow as somebody who's seen all these snaps and seen all these looks with Philly, and even though he's not great, knowing you have some semblance of a known quantity and floor there, and maybe Dorian Williams has an uptick, and Spector does some nice things at times, yada, yada. I don't love everybody from a depth standpoint, but you have functional depth behind Milano and Bernard, which I do like. But the high level and the ceiling for what Matt Milano is an all-pro player. And we've seen him at that spot. And I just think he moves the defense to a tier above than what it is without him. If you have a good defense, he makes you a great defense. If you have a great defense, he can take your defense to top 5 type of category and regularity. And I found myself because the positional value at linebacker isn't necessarily there league wide. And especially considering it's a position that is pretty dependent on what happens in front of you. If you don't get good defensive line play and you don't get dudes that can kind of help you from a functional standpoint, you're not necessarily a sitting duck at the linebacker spot, but you will struggle. We saw it in, Ray Lewis is a Hall of Fame linebacker, arguably the greatest linebacker of all time. There's a big difference in Ray Lewis play when he, in between like the Sam Adams years and the Haloti Ngata years, those dark years when he didn't have that kind of protection in front of him on the defensive line, there was a difference in his play in terms of how hard he had to work and how much he was kind of handcuffed or limited because he didn't have the freedom to work. Despite that being said, my answer here is Matt Milano, being the most important player for the Bills defense in 2024. And some of it really starts to come back into like the league-wide trends that we're seeing with running the football kind of coming back in vogue and into fashion. I think second-level defenders are going to be of even more importance now because you already had to be athletic enough to play the pass, But if you weren't physical or violent enough to play the run, you could kind of get away with that because top tier offenses were probably just going to be passing offenses. Teams weren't really running the ball a ton. If they were probably running zone. So you really just needed an athletic linebacker to flow sideline to sideline. Now you're getting more downhill runs. You're getting more gap runs. Teams are running duo. Teams are running inside zone. Power's coming back. GT counter. And the teams are running quarterbacks or running read option and the QB bash and all this kind of stuff. So second level defenders are of even more importance now to be athletic enough to play the pass and simultaneously physical and violent enough to play the run. Then you take everything Matt Milano can do in coverage, spot drop, match, man coverages. He can blitz. I think he adds another layer to creeper and simulated pressures and the Bills' 5-man pressure packages, which were tremendous. All three of those, creeper, sims, and 5-man pressure packages and 6-man pressure stuff, even though they didn't run a ton of it. To start the year with Milano was on fire. And he adds another level of that because of his anticipation, his quickness, his ability to shoot gaps, but also playing coverage in a variety of ways. And this is a guy who his last fully healthy season, which was in 2022, so his most recent full season and an all-pro season, he had the lowest quarterback rating when targeted amongst 80 qualifying linebackers. If you add corners to that mix, he had the lowest QB rating. He had the 18th lowest QB rating when targeted out of 200 qualifying players, and he was the only linebacker in the top 25. And out of 165 players of any position defensively, he had the 5th lowest EPA per target allowed in 2022 and the lowest amongst linebackers, and also the 9th lowest total EPA overall, and the lowest for linebackers. I just think he moves that needle so significantly. And I briefly thought of Bernard because of the air traffic controller role that he played last year and the bridge that he was for the defense in general, but especially between the back end and the defensive line, merging the back end and the front. How smart he is, his football IQ, his functional football intelligence, and even his quick trigger and how he sees the game and what he can do versus the run and the pass. But I just think Milano is the better player. And I know Bernard, I think, is a force multiplier mentally. But I think Milano has shades of that as well that he doesn't get credit for. And then the force multiplier that he is from a physical standpoint versus the pass and versus the run, I think he elevates everyone's game. That was a big component for this answer for me as well. Like, how much of a force multiplier are you? How difficult is your position? How important is your position overall, specifically in this defense? What does the rest of the position group look like? And so Taryn was in that conversation. Then I went to the D line. Then I went back to the second level because of the reasons that I said. And so Bernard was in that conversation for me. But I settled on Milano just because I think he significantly moves that needle more given what his high level is. And granted, we don't know what Bernard's ceiling is because he hasn't hit it yet. His ceiling could be equal to Milano's, maybe potentially even better. But to your point, I think expecting that kind of jump or that type of trajectory isn't a guarantee. So I'm not betting on that. I'm betting on the known quantity. And we've seen Matt Milano play tremendous football. And, he's been playing at an all-pro level for years, even if he hasn't officially been declared that more than one season. And so my answer is Matt Milano.
I thought about Milano. I went with the same logic. I have more faith in the running mate. I have more faith in Bernard being able to hold down, the second level if Milano were to get hurt, because of course we've seen that.
Yeah.
We've seen Sean McDermott, until the playoffs anyway, be able to keep a second level together with duct tape and baling wire. And so for me, that I went the exact same logic. I thought about Milano long and hard, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to use consistent logic, which is why I went back around.
And see, that was in my head too. I was like, well, we've seen the defense without Milano, and they were able to hold their own, but
it's not the same. Correct. Just because they held their own doesn't mean they were great.
Yes.
It doesn't mean they have Milano.
Exactly. And
today's defense, it's about getting explosive plays on offense and getting explosive plays on defense and stopping explosive plays on defense. And Matt Milano is an explosive play walking around. He'll just go get you a bucket on defense. And those kind of defenders, people who can make impact plays, that can stall drives, turn the ball over, you need that in today's NFL. So that's just the way it works.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you made the consideration for you. And it's a fun conversation, I think, because I legitimately think you could ask like 10 people for their answer and you could get 10 different answers and 10 different combinations, especially if you're just focusing on 2024 and you're not talking about future, you're talking about just this one individual season in and of itself. Anything else on this topic before we move on?
No, because it's 9:30 and we're through one question.
But honestly, we're pretty good. We stalled a little bit because you had computer updates. So I think from on air time, we're not great, but we're doing decent. But we did have that delay in the beginning. But I feel you, and we'll move on. Next superlative question, label, however you want to phrase it. The defensive player that will exceed expectations the most in 2024 for the Buffalo Bills. Who do you got for this one?
It's Gregory Rousseau again. And the reason that is because I think expectations are understandably lower because of last year. And I don't think enough people are taking into consideration the injuries that he was fighting through last year because it really wasn't a super public thing. And so I think that the expectations has been set low enough for Gregory Rousseau that just staying healthy, I think people will be impressed with what they get from Gregory Rousseau. So it's about expectations minus reality equals disappointment. And I think the expectations for him are low. And so the reason why I feel comfortable saying he'll exceed them is because if I get the same level of play from Gregory Rousseau that I got at the beginning of 2023 over the course of an entire year relative to expectations, publicly, I think that's going to be meaningful. And so other people, you get hype around rookies. So those things I can't really use them because I need something where the difference between expectation and reality would be significant. So for me, I'm going Gregory Rousseau again.
I'm with the edge grouping, like you are. Grousseau. Oh, I guess that kind of works. Right, Grousseau. I can just combine it and say Grousseau, like you
Grousseau.
Do.
Absolutely.
I might just try and make that a thing.
We are Grousseau.
I like that. I like that. VPG and Grousseau. See, you get it. We're right here. I thought about Groot. For me, it really, and obviously with the question, for me, it really was that expectation level in terms of the expectation I have for a player, the expectations that I think a lot of people have for a player, like what the consensus expectation level is relative to who they are. I'm going to go with AJ Epinesa just because, and again, for me, it's more of the expectation level. I think the expectation level for Epinesa is lower than what Groot's is. And I think how far Epinesa could exceed those expectations is larger than what Groot can. Granted, I think Groot is a better player and will be a better player and more important player for this defense in 2024. But I feel like
that's not the prompt.
What do you mean?
That what you say, I think Groot's a better player, but that's not the prompt.
Yes.
So you're making a really good range point here.
And that's exactly what it is for me. Like, I think Groot is going to end up here and AJ Epinesa will be here. But I think Groot's expectations are like here and Epinesa's are more down. I think Epinesa's are a bit lower, but I just wanted to keep this other hand on camera. But that's exactly what it is. Like, I just think and understandably, I feel like he's a bit of an afterthought within the defense. So again, this answer comes down to, how little he's spoken of versus how well I think he can do. And you mentioned some of his stats and some of the pieces. So in 2023, amongst 118 qualifying edges, he was tied for 27th in pass rush productivity. Pass rush productivity is a formula that combines sacks, hits, and hurries relative to how many times a player rushes the passer. He was only 3 spots behind Greg Rousseau and only 0.2 of a point behind him in overall PRP score. He was also tied for first in batted passes, and something that he showed a legitimate knack for. It was not accidental. He's deflecting passes. He's knocking them down. He's popping them up into the air. His ability to drop off into coverage, the pick 6 touchdown against Washington wasn't accidental. The way he plays the route in front of him and the route behind him and how he spaces Sam Howell scrambling and running towards him, like, he makes a very good football play and puts the onus onto Sam Howell to make that play. Howell tries to make a play, and then Epinesa uses his size and length and frame to jump up and snatch the ball out of the air and then house it. Just what he showed in that regard, taking his game to another level. I thought his run defense also improved, even at the back end of 2022, really starting with the Bears game. Granted, he was pretty poor in run defense before that, so it was kind of one of those, like, nowhere really to go but up from here. But he improved that aspect in 2023. And I think overall, by year's end, we could see AJ Epinesa creep up into a low-end edge 2 type of role. So again, somebody who's not the sexiest, and he's not this, to use that phrasing again, I don't think he's going to be a guy that can go and get you a bucket. But I think right now he's very much in a conversation of like, okay, he's a high-end edge 4 or a good or solid like edge 3, I think is the kind of the consensus or the expectation level for him. I think the plays that he can make this year and where he can get his game to, I think will be a low-end edge 2 if all things go right. And then Groot was in, I'm not going to hammer home too much on it because you spoke so well about him, but Groot for me, I think, is in a similar situation where I think he's an edge 1 against the run, one of the best in the league. I think he's more of an edge 2, mid-tier to low in terms of overall like ability to get to the quarterback consistently, though his metrics aren't bad. If he hits, I think he could be an overall complete edge 1. I just don't think that jump is as great as the jump that Epinesa can be made relative to where he is now and what those expectations are. Anything else on this piece before we move forward?
No, let's do it.
I like it. I like it. All right. Next segment, label, superlative question. The individual starting defensive player that you are most concerned about or wary of in 2024?
Assuming Taylor Rapp is a starter, it's Taylor Rapp.
Okay.
I was in the bucket of people who I don't think Taylor Rapp played all that well last year. And when the Bills re-signed him and he was like, hey, I'm going to come here and I want to compete for a starting job. I was like, really? So are we sure about it? Like, are we just gonna we're not even gonna talk about this? Like no one's gonna fight him or anything like that.
We're just letting this happen. Like this is just what we're doing.
I was just looking around like, am I taking crazy pills here? And it feels to me like the only thing people remember about Taylor Rapp last year was the interception against Tua Tagovailoa to help seal the Bills' AFC East crown. And I'm like, well, he played 420 other snaps. And do we watch the rest of them? Because I didn't think he played all that well last year. Now there's the whole, second season in the system and things like that. And he was playing a little bit more out of position and I was okay. All the built-in stuff. Mm-hmm. But if you just project out the way that he played before and the way he played now, and then you look at the remainder of the defense, right? Mm-hmm. Known quantity, right? Gregory Rousseau, we've already talked about today. Even I think injured last year was still a perfectly solid player, right?
Yes.
AJ Epinesa, you're projecting out a little bit, but you're hoping for efficiency to stay with increased volume. Mm-hmm. But even if efficiency doesn't stay, but just general talent level does, then you're like, okay, you can still rotate in, you're fine. Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones, not an issue. Taron Johnson, not an issue. Matt Milano, not an issue. I mean, okay, Christian Benford, I think Christian Benford's really good. So I don't know why we don't talk about. I mean,
I thought about him here just because of like being injured in back-to-back seasons and that potentially worrying me. But if we're talking about just like as a player, no, I'm not concerned. Or I think Christian Benford at the end of this year could be a legitimate high-end CB2 or potentially a low-tier CB1 with how his trajectory has been.
He's very, very good. And he might be one of the best kept secrets in the NFL. And it feels like the Bills specialize in players like that for a long time. Of course, it was Kyle Williams and Matt Milano. And, now apparently it's Terrell Bernard based on some comments on social media. Nobody knows actually how good he is. And Christian Benford, Khalil Shakir. Oh, wow. And, so it's got to be a safety, right? Like based on that, I think it's got to be a safety. And I don't know if you can really use Cole Bishop, assuming he becomes a starter. You can't really use him because you don't really know anything.
Yeah.
He's a second round pick. You don't win. So almost by default, it becomes Taylor Rapp if he's one of the starter safeties. The other option is it's Mike Edwards and Cole Bishop are the starting safeties, and Taylor Rapp's not the guy. He's the third guy. But I'm operating with the assumption Cole Bishop's not going to roll out there week 1 as a starting safety. So for me, if it's Mike Edwards and Taylor Rapp, I'm going with Taylor Rapp.
I came close to giving Rapp. Actually, I was super torn. It could have been a toss-up between both of these guys. One is going to be kind of a surprise, but the way I define it, I think will hopefully make a bit more sense. Rapp was in this boat for me. The safety group as a whole is very interesting. We talked about it when I had you on the show to kind of recap the draft and in terms of going forward and what it means for position groups. Yeah, I don't know what the safety group is going to look like. Is it Rapp and Edwards? Is it Rapp and Bishop? Is it Edwards and Bishop? I like Cole Bishop in terms of, again, like I talked about, more of like an apex monster man. I liked him more in like a Patriots defense or Ravens defense than I do him as either Hyde or a Poyer. Like, I think the farther he gets away from the line of scrimmage, the worse he gets. Not that he's terrible, like by any stretch of the imagination, just that he's better coming forward and better the closer he is in and around the line of scrimmage. And so, yeah, if it's Rapp, if we're just talking about like an individual overall player standpoint, it's Rapp. Edwards doesn't move the needle for me, but I think like if you look at Mike Edwards' game overall, like at pretty much everything, he's like a 6.5, which isn't great and isn't sexy, especially compared to what the Bills have had at safety in prior years. But I don't think there's any one area where he's super deficient. Like I think he's a reliable dude, good head on his shoulders, part of multiple Super Bowl winning defenses. Like those little pieces kind of balance out a lot and mitigate some things for me. And again, I don't think he's overly deficient in any one area. I thought Rapp showed some deficiencies at times last year. Bishop, to your point, we can't make any guesstimation or analysis on what he is because there is no known quantity of him at the NFL level. So Rapp was going to be my answer, just again, kind of like by, default. Because if we're looking at the other starters everywhere, sorry, the camera's out of focus and it's driving me nuts. There we go. Like Benford, no. Rasul Douglas, no. Bernard and Milano, no. Taron Johnson, no. And then the defensive line starters, not really. But I have one kind of dark horse answer, and I'll give it since you talked about Rapp, and I don't want to double up. But this might seem ridiculous because he's one of the best players on the defense and had an absolute phenomenal year last year. But I'm a bit concerned about / wary of Ed Oliver when it comes to these big time playoff moments and these big time playoff games. And the Cincinnati game, it wasn't ideal for him or anyone on that defense, but I don't rake him over the coals too much because how much quick passing the Bengals had in that game. And there actually were times where Ed Oliver won up front, but the ball got out in like 1.9 seconds, and it just wasn't humanly possible through physics for anybody to get to Burrow and make anything happen. Like the lack of marriage between the front and coverage in that game against Cincinnati was overwhelmingly terrible, and guys didn't really have a chance to get home up front.
Did you scream at the L-22? Because I did.
Bro, it was just it was one of those games. I'm obviously a Bills fan, but I'm more of a football fan than I am a Bills fan. So even in the losses, they suck to go back and watch on tape, but I'll watch it and still find some things that I like or even have an appreciation for the other team or the other players. That game was a game where I just did not want to watch the Bills defense like the All-22. And I felt like every play I wanted to claw my eyes out. It was just so... And still right now with that game against the Bengals, I don't get... Obviously, I'm not an NFL coach. Like, you're not an NFL coach. Like, Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott will have forgotten more about football than you or I will ever know about football. But I really just think, like, we could have had a better game plan than what they had in that game. And, like, it's still mind-boggling to me, like, going back and thinking about it and watching it. And everybody holistically struggled from the game plan to the execution on the field. Ed Oliver didn't have an impact in that game, but no one really did. Again, I think a lot of that was schematic and game plan pieces. The big one that really worried me was just seeing how much he got erased by Joe Thuney in that game against Kansas City. And I know they were banged up on defense significantly. And so a lot of his support pieces, his anchor players on that side of the ball that could have made a difference, those different difference makers and impact makers weren't necessarily there. So there was more of a focus on him. But without Milano, without Bernard, with Leonard Floyd maybe kind of being banged up, with Rasul Douglas being banged up, with Christian Benford being out, with Daquan Jones being in there, but maybe not 100%, with Greg Rousseau kind of getting healthier, but not necessarily himself. For a guy that's supposed to be an impact player and who had a tremendous 2023, you needed him to make more of an impact than ever. And I say that to put into perspective, his 2023 was phenomenal. Amongst 129 qualifying defensive tackles last year, he was 4th in total pressures, tied for 5th in pass rush productivity, 4th in hurries, and 4th in sacks. Like, he had a monster of a year. He registered at least 2 pressures in every single game last year in 2023. In the wild card round against Pittsburgh, he had 7 pressures in that game. Against Kansas City, he had no pressures, 1 tackle, 0 stops. And a lot of what was happening in that game was Joe Thuney just beating the hell out of him left and right and just not allowing him to get any semblance of a win. And I take that game and I think of him against more elite competition and what that potentially looks like. And on the whole, I think Ed Oliver is a very good player, and he's a very important player for this Bills team. The only reason I throw him out is like concerned about or wary of is if the Bills get to the playoffs and they play a team with like elite interior play, going into that week, in the back of my mind is going to be, is Ed going to get erased in this game, or how much of an impact can he make? And that's the only reason I put him kind of into this conversation.
That's fair. I think part of the joy of questions like this is seeing the methodology differences between the way you approach them. And you say, okay, well, I define it this way, so I came up with this. Well, I define it this way, so I came up with this. It's a little bit like when you sit with your wife and you're watching television and you pause it for a second, you turn to the person, they go, hey, do you think that guy's hot? You think that girl's hot? And then there comes this whole thing where you're like, well, let's define hot. Right. And it turns into an episode of The Office where it's like, the question was, is she hot? Not would you do her?
And who is it? Who are they asking about? It's what's your face, $1 Million Baby, right?
The $1 Million Baby.
And from Karate Kid 3.
Yes.
Oh, what's her name?
All right, hold on. Here we go.
Look it up. It's going to drive me nuts. I can't move on.
It's
not Amy something. That's wrong.
Hilary Swank.
Thank you. Okay, sorry. Continue. That was going to drive me nuts.
Yeah, and so that's the difference. The difference is that different methodologies lead you down different paths, and how you define hot, or how you define concerned, or how you define wary, right, changes the trajectory of the question. So I think that's part of the joy of the questions like this.
Yeah, that's why it's a fun exercise, and why I wanted to do this exercise in this episode with you. But if we had to throw it out there, Taylor, if what we anticipate the starting lineups to be, my answer is Taylor Rapp. But this is just one little like nugget that sticks in the back of my mind. Sure. And also too, because you said Rapp, I was like, well, I don't want this segment to just be like 10 seconds long. So I'll go forward. Anything else before we move on to the next one? All right. So the next question, label, superlative, the position group that you feel most confident in on the Bills defense in 2024 is?
It's the linebackers. And I'm going to go ahead and count. I'm going to cheat. I am going to say second level defenders in nickel, and I'm going to include Taron Johnson. I think you have 3 legitimate all-pro level players.
Oh, wow. Okay. So Bernard is in that conversation for you.
Bernard was so good last year.
Very good.
Bernard was so good last year. I was legitimately floored because we had 7 snaps and we were all analyzing the exact same 7 snaps.
Yeah, that game against the Jets.
The game against the Jets, the entire 2023 offseason was just us watching the Jets game on repeat and going, well, there's something there, or there's not anything there. I don't know what there is to there. And I'm messaging Eric back and forth like, hey, did you watch the Jets game? Hey, yeah. How many times? 20, 24? Yeah. Okay. And so I think that for me, that's the most talented position group if you count Taron Johnson, which he's a linebacker in basically in this scenario. The most talented position group on the team. And I think you've backfilled a lot of depth. I feel better about linebacker depth this year than I did last year.
Same.
I don't think you're going to be calling AJ Klein off the couch when he's going to go on vacation. No. And that's good. Knock on wood. So for me, it's the linebackers.
I'm going to talk a little bit on both sides of my mouth here and I'm going to go with a different one because you said linebackers. Linebacker was here for me, which is also what made me feel conflicted about saying Matt Milano is the most important player of the defense. But that's just how highly I view Matt Milano, is that even in a position group that I'm confident in holistically, he's such a difference maker and moves the needle for me schematically so far that's why he ended up being my answer for the first one. For our first one in terms of most important player. I am confident in the linebackers though, like we said. Again, I don't think Nicholas Morrow is the sexiest linebacker 3 if he is the one who wins linebacker 3, but I'm cool having a dude who just started the handful and significant majority of games for a team that was viewed as one of the best teams in the NFL last year in the Philadelphia Eagles until they really fell apart, especially defensively kind of midway and towards the end of the year. Playoff experience. He was a dude that was on the Bills radar several years ago. Again, you're never going to get to a spot where your third string guy is this all pro waiting in the wings. There's very few, I don't know, San Francisco 49ers scenarios where it's if Warner or Greenlaw go out, they have what's his face who went to the Titans last year on a free agent, Al-Shaair. All these dudes where it just seems whoever they plug in, or it's oh man, Dre Greenlaw went down. What are they going to do? And then Burke steps in and is nasty. There's very few teams that are just loaded at these spots or have these guys that are kind of, unfound or unheard of gems. So I think Morrow, again, being a linebacker 3, who knows, maybe Deion Jones still has something in the tank. And then again, you've got Spector, you've got Dorian Williams. I think overall the functionality and the depth at that spot is good. So linebacker was in this one for me. I was torn between it, but since you spoke on it, I'm going to go with my other one. And this is where I really kind of speak out of both sides of my mouth. A little bit with the linebacker spot, Milano, but I'm going to say edge, but for a very, very, very specific reason. And I want to clarify it because I don't love the edge grouping. And I'm very, very, very concerned about where their top tier production is going to come from a pass rush standpoint. Again, we already talked about what Greg Rousseau is. Greg Rousseau is edge one on this team. He's not an edge one from a pass rush standpoint right now. He very well could be, especially if he can stay healthy this year. But given what I expect from Von Miller, which we're going to get into in a bit in this episode, I think you have a bunch of B-level players at edge, which gives you a solid rotation, albeit in lieu of having multiple A-level players or a dude who can get you a bucket at any point and win in iso ball. Greg Rousseau, AJ Epinesa, Von Miller, Dewan Smoot, which I think is an underrated signing, Casey Toohill, Javon Solomon, Kingsley Jonathan, whatever 4 or 5 man combo you have from that, I think gives you a fine like NFL caliber floor from anywhere to like up to like kind of 6, 5.5, maybe 6 guys. The problem is the ceiling is limited. I think you can schematically generate pressure while having a group of edges that offer athleticism and run defense. And again, the problem with that is you're just missing that dude that can straight up get you a bucket versus the pass. Again, Groot is the closest to that, but he isn't a surefire thing. So you need to schematically generate pressure because you don't have any one guy who can win at any moment, or you don't have like multiple high level pass rushers. So the edge grouping, I didn't expect this for like to be my answer here because it's such a concern point for me because I don't know like who is edge 2 on this team from a pass rush standpoint. Is it Von Miller? Is it AJ Epinesa? Is it someone else? Is Groot still just going to be an edge 2 from a pass rush standpoint? Can he take that step and be an edge 1? From a pass rush standpoint and be more of a complete player when you factor in what he is against the pass or against the run. I have so many questions about the edge grouping from a top tier standpoint in terms of like, okay, can anybody be like a B plus or an A minus or an A guy? But when you look at it, although it isn't sexy and it's not fun, and there is more onus on the coordinator and the coaching staff to kind of scheme things up, I think having a bunch of B minus level dudes who can all rotate in and give you high effort, athleticism, and nastiness from a run defense standpoint with some schematic generation possibility baked in there, it could be worse, although I don't love the top tier aspect. So linebacker is that answer for me, but edge was a sneaky one that I didn't see myself leaning into. But when I looked at it holistically, as much as I'm underwhelmed by that group from a top shelf standpoint, I think from a depth standpoint and just solid rotation, having a bunch of B-level dudes isn't a horrible thing.
B's get degrees. Do we go there?
I was waiting. I was like, I wonder if he's going to have something like to go. I like that. I like that. I was like, yeah, spoiler. I did. Anything on that before we move on to our next one?
No.
All right. Flip side of that, the position group you are most concerned about and or wary of on defense in 2024?
It's safety.
Oh, okay.
It's safety, and it's right behind defensive end for me. So as far as the positional groups go, it goes linebackers, corner, defensive tackle, defensive end, safety.
Okay.
In that order. And it's not because we lost Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, I think this was quite frankly the perfect time to move off both those players. They
lost a step. They weren't the Hyde and Poyer that we put our faith in and nicknamed ourselves after.
Yes, absolutely. You and I, did we determine what we are anymore?
Nope.
Because we were the Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde of Bill's Mafia content creation, and now I don't know what we are. Are we the Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones?
I'd rather be the Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard, but I really like defensive backs more than linebackers, so yeah. I don't know what to do. It's tough.
We'll figure it out. It'll come to us in a stroke of lightning. We will have an apostrophe instead of an epiphany. Have you seen Hook?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so he gets the joke. So for those of you listening who don't know what I'm talking about, so Bob Hoskins plays Shmi in the movie Hook, which is a great movie from the early 90s, I think. About Peter Pan, and Robin Williams plays Peter Banning, who is a lawyer in England, I think, and he realizes that he's actually Peter Pan and he had just forgotten. And they go back and, well, Bob Hoskins plays Shmi, and he's talking to Captain Hook, and he says, I just had an apostrophe. And he says, I think you mean an epiphany. He goes, lightning has just struck my brain. And then he goes on about the whole idea that he just had about turning Peter's kids against him. But anyway,
that's a great movie.
It is a great movie. I watched it the other day and I thought to myself, they don't make movies like this anymore. The whole swashbuckling adventure, like so the good. Goonies and Hook and things like that. Those types of movies don't exist anymore. They don't do that.
I always found the lore of like Peter Pan and specifically that movie where like he leaves and then comes back and is Peter Pan but can't remember, and then he figures like even just that whole scene of when things finally click and the table fills up with food because everything comes back to him, and like he remembers
because he imagines it. He imagines it so it shows up.
Yes, and like when he remembers how to crow and the whole bangarang piece. Peter Pan is also one, like there's very few things that I've wanted, not from just a violent standpoint, but I think deserve like more of an R-rated type of movie. And the whole concept of like basically these like child soldiers fighting all these grown men pirates and dueling them to the death. Like
there's something like deeply dark about that we don't talk about.
Correct. Same thing with like Power Rangers. They're basically elite super soldiers that are getting like shot up and having PTSD and all this crazy stuff. And then the other one, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They're walking ninjas with blades. Like all of their weapons are blades. Michelangelo's nunchucks. Yep. And Donatello's the bow staff. But like Raphael and Leonardo should be slicing dudes up, and like Donatello and Michelangelo should be causing like bone breaks and blood, and like Shredder and the Foot are just like nasty like that.
Well, they eat pizza, so it's all fine.
Yeah, but they're teenagers and pizza and they're led by a rat, so ha ha ha, all jokes. But like, no, we need an R-rated like Logan style type of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because at the end of the day, they're turtles, but they're assassins.
We got a Rufio from the comments section.
Yes,
Rufio.
The one thing I always say, if anybody tries to like, with me and my friend group, if anybody tries to like take something from someone or like leave someone behind, we always give the Rufio line of like, I got Pan's sword, I'm the Pan now. And it's just that was just the one thing I always like.
Okay, I'm down for it. So for me, it's safety. Anyway, the original prompt, in case we forgot,
so for your
was the position group that you're most concerned or wary about. It's safety, and it's not because we lost Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. It's because the best, most reliable, most sure thing you have back there at this point is Mike Edwards.
Fair.
That's why. So Damar Hamlin at absolute peak Damar Hamlin was a lot of fun to watch come downhill against the run. And I thought he struggled in coverage. Cole Bishop is a rookie and we have no idea what we're going to get there. We've already mentioned Taylor Rapp. Correct. And so for me, you got to go, 4 men deep. And then all of a sudden you're like, I still don't feel great. And so for me, it's safety. I am the most concerned about it. However, I want to caveat it with this.
Oh, okay.
Sean McDermott has earned trust on defensive backs. The man can turn a back seven full of insurance agents and garbage collectors into a competent secondary using duct tape, baling wire, smoke, and mirrors. Right? He's done it over and over and over again. The Panthers and again with the Bills and over and over. You just lose really talented players all the time and just, oh, what's that? Levi Wallace becomes a completely reasonable starter for multiple years on a really good defense? Sure. Dane Jackson, plug him in. Let's go. And so for me, that's the way that I feel about the safeties. Yes, I'm concerned about the talent level, but that concern is still pretty high floor because of who we're dealing with.
I like the way you phrase that because I echo a lot of the same sentiments here. Real quick for Steve, yes, Justin Simmons is still out there. So is Quandre Diggs, who I like a little bit more than Simmons, mainly just because of cost and the type of game that he plays. But yeah, there's some good safeties that are still out there on that market. Safety is up there for me as well for all the reasons that you said, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much. I just worry about how schematically limited the defense may be because of the skill sets and body types you have back there at safety. But then on the flip side of it, again, you have this coach in Sean McDermott who has just again, your metaphor or analogy aspect of what he's been able to do and what he's been able to get out of dudes is spot on. So I'm not even gonna try to make one. Like he just gets the most blood out of that stone. I just don't know how much blood there is in the safety stone with what's back there. And again, Cole Bishop is a huge part of that conversation, but it's still very much TBD, and we don't know anything on him right now from an NFL known quantity standpoint. So safety is up there for me. It's sneaky one for me is corner, not because of the starters. If you told me for the entire year that it was going to be Rasul Douglas and Christian Benford, I am not worrying about anything with the cornerback grouping. I think Rasul Douglas played like a CB1 last year. I hate that he got hurt going into that Kansas City game because I feel like also what I'm about to say could be said of like 7 different Bills players. But if Rasul Douglas was healthy going into that game against Kansas City, I think there's a different kind of defensive performance in that game. But you could just see him trying to chase down dudes. Like his lower body, he just did not have it with how he was banged up going into that game. So Douglas and Benford, I am very, very, very happy with. Kaiir Elam, I want to believe in Kaiir Elam, kind of like Robin Williams, wanted to believe, but he just couldn't, and then eventually he did. I want to believe in Kaiir Elam. I just don't right now. And he's cornerback 3, and with how corners get banged up in general, let alone with Christian Benford getting banged up both points or in both seasons thus far in his career, Kaiir Elam's probably going to see time in 2024, and things could 100% work out, and Kaiir Elam could become the prince that was promised. I'm not writing him off in any way, shape, or form. I'm not ready to close the door or close the book on him at all. I'm just not confident in him seeing regular starter reps, and I hope the coaching change works out with Adai being back there instead of Butler. I hope there's some sort of new defensive direction that unlocks things for him mentally or physically. But Elam being your 3, and then Jamarcus Ingram being your 4, who I like, but more in the slot, that just has me wary a little bit. And again, just specifically with Elam, for me, it's just the way he panics at the top of routes. Like he'll be in good positions, but at the top of routes or at the route breaks, he panics. He gets grabby because of that panic, along with poor footwork. He reaches, he lunges, he grabs. Back-to-back seasons in camp, they've had to construct special like gloves and circumstances for him because he gets so grabby in drills and one-on-one, and we've seen it show its ugly head at multiple points throughout his rookie year and throughout year 2. So again, I'm not closing the door on him. I'm not writing him off and saying that they should trade him or be done with him. I just don't believe in Kaiir Elam, and I feel great about the starters, Douglas and Benford, but it's so rare for both of your corners to just last an entire season. So you're going to corner 3 is going to see action. Corner 4 is probably going to see action. And I don't feel great about Kaiir Elam. I don't feel great about Jamarcus Ingram. And then also, again, talking out of both sides of my mouth, the specific aspect that I am very wary of, and if we were just talking about one isolated skill set piece, I might be the most concerned about pass rush off the edge, just because I don't, like I talked about it, again, I'm not going to drill too much on it because I spoke about it in the last segment, but I am concerned about who's going to give that pass rush pop off the edge, aside from, like, we're hoping that it's Groot and he takes that jump and then someone else does in some way, shape, or form, but a lot of it just seems very, like, hope-based. And like, well, if this happens, then there's like a lot of ifs and hopes when it comes to the pass rush pop from the edge grouping. So if I'm talking about one specific aspect, that's arguably the thing I'm most concerned about. But then, yeah, it's safety and it's corner for me, just because I think that depth is going to get tested at corner, and I am not confident in corner 3 and corner 4. Anything else on this before we move on to our next one?
Fair, but we also got a Brucio from the comment section, and that I'm assuming in the rhythm of Rufio, and now I kind of feel like I need that. So
you should go with it. I feel like you need to incorporate it somehow, some way, shape.
Yeah, I'll figure it out.
I'll workshop it.
Yeah, I'll workshop it. I think there's a Photoshop to be done there, I think.
Anything else before we move on to the next?
Nah.
All right. Mr. Von Miller, expectations for him in 2024.
Better than last year. Not peak Von Miller, not close to peak Von Miller. I would go with a contributor in 2024.
Ooh. How do you define contributor?
Well, last year he was not a contributor.
So just better than last year.
So let's go with that. Better than last year. Last year, it was every single week. It was, why is Von Miller on the field right now? He's completely ineffective. Yeah. Why is he on the field right now? He's not staying disciplined in his rush lanes, which is, to be fair, always kind of been a Von Miller thing.
Fair.
Going way too far upfield, but he could get away with it because he made splash plays in the pass game, and he wasn't making splash plays in the pass game. And so for me, a contributor to me is what my expectations are, which is a step above last year. But I know that Von is the most positive, speaking manifestation person on the planet. The idea that we're going to get something even close to being peak Von Miller at this point is I can't get there mentally. So for me, contributor is where I'm going with.
What do you think his ceiling is? Like, if all things click, everything goes right, what is like the top level of production, however you want to quantify it?
6.5 sacks.
Okay. Oof. And man, that's fair. I'm putting it into, so I defined it just by like kind of edge 1, edge 2, edge 3 type of aspect. I feel like the high end for Von Miller this year, like if things hit, is kind of in line with the 6.5 sacks piece. Like my high end for him is an edge 3 or like a low end edge 2. I think realistically, we're looking at him being like a mid or lower tier 3, or you defined it as contributor. I defined it as just solid, like a rotational piece, like a guy who gives you, he's out there. Okay, maybe he makes something happen. Maybe he does something, but basically kind of to your point, like he's just not a walking L or just a walking abomination where he's just completely ineffective and just looks so lost, not mentally, but just from a physical standpoint, just look like a guy who did not have it. And I don't think either of our answers are too positive for a fan base that is clinging to, or actually, no, I don't even know if people are clinging to like a hope of what Von Miller can be. I think a lot of people have kind of written him off and just assumed that he's going to be nothing. And I understand that. I also just hate the conversation around it because everybody dunking on like how bad of a signing that was and how bad of a move that was. And injuries are never guaranteed with anything. And before he got hurt, he looked to be worth every single penny of that contract in year one. He was a huge, huge difference maker for this Bills team and made everybody better by extension. But yeah, I'm not holding out a ton of hope for him. And my expectation is, just a solid rotational dude. And I think like from a high end perspective, you defined it as 6.5 sacks. I defined it more in terms of like role. I think high end, we're looking like if the ceiling is there for him, he's a high end edge 3 or a low end edge 2. Like at best, I think you're looking at, if all things click with the edge grouping, and this is what scares me and what I talk about being concerned with like the top tier production coming from edge and where does it come from? You talked about it with Groot. Like if Groot hits, he becomes a complete edge 1 and it's like, sweet. If AJ Epinesa hits, like he's like a mid 2 at best, probably more like a low end 2. And then if Von Miller hits, realistically, he's maybe like a low end 2 or a high 3. And I don't feel great with either of those in rotation. Like with Groot, give me a 1 and a solid overall 2. Either way, I don't think they get that. And I don't think Von Miller is going to be that. And so just expecting him to be a solid rotational dude, I think is fair, but also lends to the conversation we're having about why the edge grouping is kind of a worrisome or, group to be wary of.
Yeah.
Anything else on Mr. Von Miller before we move on to our last segment?
Nope.
Biggest surprise on defense for the Buffalo Bills in 2024. Now, this could be anything. It could be a player making the roster. It could be a player being cut. It could be something schematic. It could be something high level and, wide net casting. It could be something very niche. What do you got, Bruce, for what you think that will be the biggest surprise on defense for the Bills this year?
I'm going to predict the Bills run more man coverage than you think.
Oh, okay.
I think one of the things that we talk about a lot with Bobby Babich is because he's been in the Bills environment, we assume it's going to be very, very similar to Sean McDermott's defense. And I know it's going to have Sean McDermott's fingerprints on it because it's impossible to not have Sean McDermott's fingerprints on it. Bobby Babich has influences in his NFL career that I don't think people think about. He has influences under Ray Horton. He has influences under Mike Pettin and Jim O'Neill. And so these are people who were blitz heavy, man coverage defensive coordinators. I mean, Ray Horton, Mike Pettin, right? Mike Pettin brought the house all the time.
Yeah, I'll say
right?
Mike Pettin, every snap.
Under Rex Ryan. And so for me, I don't think you can just look at the Sean McDermott influence as being the only influence for Bobby Babich. I think that if there's any chance at salvaging Kaiir Elam. I think that's one of the ways you do it. But I don't, quite frankly, I don't think he's going to see enough snaps for it to matter. And barring injury, I don't think Kaiir Elam is making an impact this year.
I would second that notion. I just think he'll see snaps because of injury.
Just for the remainder of his rookie contract. I am not holding out hope that Kaiir Elam is going to break out and become a corner. At this point, I've pretty much just crossed that off and said, yep, you win some, you lose some, you move on. It is what it is.
Which I'm fine with, because if the cost to get Christian Benford was Kaiir Elam, I feel fine with that. Now, that's probably faulty logic and not great because you want to hit on your first round pick. But if we just pretend that Christian Benford was taken in the first and Kaiir Elam was taken in the sixth, then it's a win-win.
Just so you're all aware, I am going to be pounding the table for the re-signing of Christian Benford next offseason. So I just want you to know I'm going to be leading that charge.
And that's also, think about that too.
There are memes coming.
That's fair. With some Brucio stuff worked in there. That's a huge point for next year too, because they chose not to extend Rasul Douglas. They chose to just restructure his contract. Right now, if we're looking at 2025, Christian Benford is CB1 on the depth chart. And if his continues on the trajectory he's been on his first 2 years, he might be a legitimate CB1, albeit a low tier one, but that's still a legitimate thing. He might be a legit CB1 by the end of this year. I think he's most definitely in that category for re-signing, especially losing Trey White and Hyde and Poyer. You need some sort of new core on the back end of that defense. Taron Johnson is a piece, and if you think you have one in Christian Benford, you got to lock him up, especially with how much of a premium position cornerback still is.
I think he's CB1 now.
Oh, even over Douglas.
Yes. That's my is that a hot take? Am I spitting hot takes right now? I'm not known for hot takes. I'm known for extremely lukewarm takes.
I think if you watch the tape, that's fair. I think most people, because of how good Douglas played,
because of the splash plays that Douglas brought to the defense.
Yes, like, and you mentioned it earlier, not even nationally. I even think amongst Bills fans, Benford is kind of like underrated or an afterthought or overlooked, like some kind of.
I'm just saying that I have never drawn a bath, poured myself a glass of wine, and watched Rasul Douglas tape, but I have done that.
Wow.
With Christian Benford, because there are sometimes you just put on some jazz music, pull up your iPad in the All-22, and just relax and say, you know what, it's been a tough day. I deserve this.
I'm just letting you know
I earned this.
That's going to be a promo for this episode. I wrote down the timestamp so I wouldn't forget it. That's 100% going to be a promo. It's accurate. I just find the imagery of it all, of you just drawing the bath and the wine. And like, I picture you hitting play and then just soaking in and just like leaning. And then Benford is just coming up. It's just the imagery of all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, that's one of the joys of having Bruce on your show is, you're going to get at least a couple good sound bites for promo purposes.
Yes, absolutely. And then I picture like, your wife, like you've been in the bathroom, in the bath for like an hour, and she's like, "Are you all right in there?" And you're like, "Leave me alone. I'm watching Christian Benford."
Ma, meatloaf.
Yeah, I have no idea what she's doing back there.
Yeah. So yes, for me, that's my interpretation of the Christian Benford situation. I think he's infinitely better than people are giving him credit for. But my biggest surprise is going to be, I think we're going to see an uptick in man coverage. I think youth usually brings aggression. Bobby Babich brings energy. Energy usually brings aggression. Aggression is kind of synonymous with a little bit more man coverage. I do think that you're going to see an uptick in that.
I agree. I think they'll see an uptick in man coverage. I just picked a thing that I think is more of a surprise, and I went with an individual player piece. I think DeJuan Smoot will end up being an impact player for the Buffalo Bills at edge. I still think he's going to end up being at best like edge 3, but probably like edge 4, maybe even 5, depending on how the rotation works out. But I don't think it's going to be to the level of the Leonard Floyd signing last offseason. Floyd was tremendous, and I'm going to continue to bang the drum that I think he got nicked up, because you could see him laboring with his shoulder and even with his lower body. Like dudes were having to pick him up off the ground as the season progressed, and you really saw that drop off in production from a statistical standpoint last year. But I don't think Smoot is going to be to the level of the Floyd signing last year, because again, he was phenomenal. But I think he'll give quality reps and play a meaningful edge 3 or edge 4 who can also kick inside on passing downs. In 2022, before he got hurt, he played 15 games. He was tied for 36th in pass rush productivity out of 126 qualifying edges. And that is in that Jags defense that uses games and stunts So he has pass rush reps where his job is to be a spiker and clear the way for someone else, which isn't necessarily the biggest opportunity to generate stats and pressures and sacks and all that kind of stuff. Also in 2022, he was tied for 31st in win percentage amongst those 126 edges. He tore his Achilles in week 16 of the 2022 season, started last year on the PUP, returned in October, never really got back to form or in shape. He did an interview in like mid-November saying he was just starting to feel like good from a conditioning standpoint, as if like he would when he would get out of training camp. So last year just was not in the cards for him. And if you factor in just being over a full year removed now from that torn Achilles, having a normal offseason, and like ACL injuries, Achilles injuries being ones where you don't really get back to a semblance of yourself until that second year back from the injury. And then pair that with his play style where he's physical, he's violent, he compresses the pocket. I don't think he's going to set the world on fire, but if he can be what he was in Jacksonville or somewhat close to it, given what the edge grouping looks like, I think a solid edge 3 or edge 4, given how the depth chart is shaping up, would be a surprise. And again, that's the reason I picked him, is because, again, it's that biggest surprise. If you sat here right now and by week 7, we're like, you know what? Like, Dwan Smoot's been playing really good and been given some reps. Like, I don't think that's something that's really on anyone's mind at all. And so that's the reason I went with that, just because I think that would be a bigger surprise, because I think right now he's seen as probably a rotation guy. Does he even make the roster? Does he get cut? So I think that could be a big surprise, just given his play style and hopefully coming back from that Achilles. But again, so much of it's going to be dependent upon that Achilles injury and how he's coming back.
All right.
Anything else? Thoughts, questions, comments, concerns on anything?
Cries of outrage? No, I'm good.
Beautiful. I'm going to give you the floor. And then, you know what? We're not going to stay after or do too much, just because of how we're in downtime in the offseason, all that kind of stuff. So the floor is yours, Bruce. Anything you want to plug? Anything you want to talk about? Anything about yourself, personality? You want to show your picture, your address, social security number, bank account information, if you want to get real intimate and personal or not. The floor is yours. Do with it as you wish.
Yeah, we're not going to do that. Instead, I'd like to share with you. For those of you who know anything about me, you know that The Good Place is my favorite television program of all time. And I recently finished another rewatch of The Good Place. And a specific quote stuck out to me that I wanted to share with you. And in this situation, in the Good Place, Michael is attempting to explain human morality to a very disconnected, essentially, judge of the universe. And he says, what matters isn't if people are good or bad. What matters is if they are trying to be better today than they were yesterday. And he's basically talking about projection. He's talking about the trajectory of human ethics, and that nobody is past saving if they're trying. And so I know that it's not a great time in human history to look at the news a lot, and it makes you feel all sorts of ways. And it's funny. You're simultaneously really, really busy all the time and overpopulated and crowded, but also you feel very isolated and alone. It's a very strange time to exist in human culture. And I just want to share with you that I think that the most important thing we can be doing is trying. And I've been trying to reflect on that recently. I've had a little bit of time over the last couple of months that I don't usually have. And I've been trying to dwell on that. And I hope that that can be of encouragement to you, because it's something that was an encouragement to me.
Wow, that was really deep and poignant. Well said. I was expecting some kind of just witty Bruceisms or some kind of, you know what? It's funny. I was expecting some kind of plug or relation to The Good Place or some sort of show, but I like the direction you took that in.
You never know what you're going to get with me.
You never know. No,
Mama always said Bruce was like a box of chocolates.
I was just going to say you're a box of chocolates. Well done. Very well done. Thank you very much, Bruce, for joining me in this episode. As always, I enjoy just sitting down with you and chatting with you, whether it's on air or in the DMs and all that stuff so much. So I appreciate you taking the time joining me. Thank you very much to everyone who rode with us live here on this episode of Disguised Coverage. The back and forth with each other in the chat, the comments to myself and Bruce, the engagement overall. Really appreciate you folks. Before you leave, please, and thank you, drop a like on this video if you are willing and able, if you would be so kind. Whether you're watching live now on YouTube and you're about to make your exit, please drop a like on this video. Or if you're watching post live later, please drop a like on this video. If you're listening on one of the podcasting apps or platforms, that's cool too. Please rate and review and subscribe to Disguise Coverage on whatever audio podcasting platform you're listening to this show on. If you're here on YouTube, turn on notifications for Disguise Coverage. Subscribe to the Cover One channel as a whole. Tell your family and friends and loved ones about how awesome this show is. Or if you thought this show was terrible, tell your enemies and try and ruin their day by making them watch this show. Again, thank you very much to you, Bruce, for joining me here in this episode. Thank you to everybody who wrote with us live. Thank you very much for all the kind words that have been filtered in throughout the episode for myself and Bruce. We see them. We greatly appreciate them. Thank you very much. And we hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. I will see you next Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern, for another episode of Disguise Coverage. Check out the Cover One Film Room with myself and Eric Turner live tomorrow night, 5 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, June 12th. And until I see you in the film room or next week on Disguise Coverage, Godspeed. And as always, go Bills.